In this slideshow, I'm going to talk more about in this slideshow, I'm going to talk about the macronutrients in more detail and specifically some tips for making good food choices. You don't need to write anything down here, but I want you to think about what healthy eating means to you. Oftentimes people say, well, I want to eat a balanced diet. Well, what does a balanced diet mean to you? We're going to try to answer some of those questions. And first of all, let's just go through a little bit of vocabulary. So what are nutrition and diet? Those words come up a lot. Nutrition is really the science of foods and the nutrients and other substances they contain. It also involves things like what happens to the food once it goes inside of our bodies. And it's further complicated because social, economic, cultural, physiological factors affect our food choices and how we eat. Now, the term diet really just refers to the foods and beverages a person eats or drinks. It's not referring to any specific named diet like the Atkins diet or South Beach diet or something like that. You've learned about the macronutrients already, which are fat, protein, and carbohydrates. But how much of each nutrient should you really have? There are various different guides that give recommendations for how much of these particular nutrients a person should have based on their gender, their age, as well as other things like if somebody is pregnant or lactating or other factors like that. So one of the common references are called dietary reference intakes. And they are values that are actually used by a lot of other organizations to create programs and make policies. And they're a good guide. They're based on science. They're used in Canada and the United States. So here are the RTIs for your age range for females and males. You can see how many calories for an average person your age they recommend. And based on your activity level, that can be higher or lower. We'll talk about that in a different lesson. But here you can see the recommended amounts of these different macronutrients. Some of these are reported in mass, like protein. It gives you the number of grams. Others are going to be giving you the percent of your calories that should come from that macronutrient. So for example, for females ages 14 to 18, they're recommending 46 grams of protein, or 10 to 30% of your total calories for the day should come from protein. For carbohydrates, you can see that carbohydrates are actually broken down into a couple different categories. So overall, you can see carbohydrates, you should get 130 grams. But fiber is also a type of carbohydrate. Added sugars are also carbohydrates. The same thing is true with our fat. And so fat, it's giving a total percentage of your calories. But then saturated fat is a type of fat. Linoleic acid linoleic acid and linolenic acid are fatty acids that we get from different types of fats, and they can give recommendations there for those particular essential fatty acids. Now, when you eat these various nutrients, a lot happens during digestion before the nutrients actually enter your bloodstream. So you put the foods into your mouth, you chew them up, that breaks the big bits into smaller bits. You're adding saliva as well. And that's important to, get it moist and smooth so it can go down your esophagus. It also has enzymes that will start breaking down the foods. So the food goes down the esophagus and eventually into your stomach. Your stomach is a very acidic environment. The stomach itself is just a big muscular sac that churns your food around. And then the acid mixes with more enzymes to continue to break the big food molecules into smaller food molecules. Once the food has been in your stomach for a couple of hours, and things like the proteins start breaking up into their the components, which are called amino acids, the chyme, which is what it's called, or chyme, gets released now into your small intestine. So here you can see the food is coming into the small intestine. The liver produces bile, which gets secreted by the gallbladder, and that helps break up fats. The pancreas also is helping out by producing a ton of digestive enzymes. So in this top part of your small intestine, the duodenum, that chyme that has come from your stomach continues to break down these large molecules like big fats get broken down into fatty acid. Things like starches get broken down into simple sugars. So tons and tons of enzymes are working here. As this liquidy mush continues to move down the small intestine, you start absorbing water as well as small molecules that have now been broken down by digestion. So the inside of your small intestine is lined with these finger-like projections called villi. And the small molecules, things like simple sugars, amino acids, and fatty acids, can actually cross the intestinal wall and enter your bloodstream. The stuff that's left over, like fiber, which comes from vegetable matter. Think of celery. The strings in the celery are lots and lots of fiber. You can't break that down. And so it gets incorporated into your feces, along with other things like dead red blood cells and other waste. You have tons of bacteria in your large intestine that do help you break down a little bit of that fiber and other stuff. And bacteria can actually produce vitamins for you, things like vitamin K and some B vitamins. And in the large intestines, you're also absorbing a ton of water. That waste gets compacted into feces and eventually excreted through the rectum out your body. So carbohydrates, which are one of the major macromolecules, include really simple molecules like sugars, which is what you end up digesting, but also includes larger molecules like starches and fiber. So starches are just really long chains of sugar. They can be unrefined, such as in whole grains and beans, or refined in things like white rice and white flour, where the outside coating of the seeds are actually removed. Depending on the type of starch you have ingested, some of those get broken down and used up by your body really quickly to release energy. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer, and that's mostly from those unrefined starches. Sugars can occur naturally in things like fruits and vegetables and milk, but a lot of times we also add sugars in a different form to our food, such as just table sugar. If you put sugar on your cereal, or put honey in your tea, or a lot of juices, or like fruit snacks and stuff have added fruit juice or corn syrup. These are very small molecules, and our body releases energy from sugars very, very quickly. Fiber is this third type of carbohydrate. I mentioned before, it comes from plant material from the cell walls of plants, and they don't get broken down by our body. Foods that are high in fiber are things like plant skins, like potato skins, beans, whole grains, nuts and seeds. Now, we don't get energy from it because we can't actually break it down and digest it, but it's really good for your digestion. It helps move things along through your gut. It can also help slow the absorption of other nutrients, making you feel fuller for longer. The body uses carbohydrates in a couple of different ways. Glucose gets used directly by cells for energy through a process called cellular respiration, which we'll learn more about in a different unit. If you consume more glucose than what you need immediately by your cells, you'll store some of it as a larger protein called glycogen, which gets stored in the liver, and then any extra gets stored as fat. Fructose, which is the sugar in fruit, actually gets processed by the liver and converted into either glucose or directly stored as fat. It's interesting that some high fructose diets might actually be linked to a higher risk of type 2 diabetes. Now, if you get too much carbohydrates, if you go way above that recommended amount, is that a problem? Generally, it's not, except it can lead to weight gain. Excess carbohydrates get stored as fat. And too many added sugars can also contribute to nutrient deficiencies because you are getting all the calories you need, but you might not be getting the other nutrients you need. And sometimes those things are called empty calories, like if you eat a lot of soda or fruit juices or other things that aren't giving you good minerals and vitamins. What about not having enough carbohydrates? The liver can actually convert fats into things called ketones and proteins into glucose for energy. But there's not too much known about long-term effects of these types of diets. So a ketogenic diet where you're eating a lot of fat can result in smelly breath, but it may also accumulate in the blood, which can disturb the body's normal acid-base balance. For lipids, and these are fats and oils, fats tend to be solid at room temperature and come from animal sources, things like butter and lard. Oils tend to be liquid at room temperature and usually come from plant sources, so things like olive oil or avocado oil. The way they're made up, they have a glycerol, which you can see up here at the top of the molecule, and then 3 fatty acids. And these fatty acids, because there are 3 of them, we typically call these molecules triglycerides. There are 2 types of fatty acids that are essential, meaning we have to eat them. We have to get them from our diet. Our bodies can't make them. And those are the omega-3 fatty acids, or alpha-linolenic acid, and the omega-6 fatty acid, linoleic acid. Every time I have a hard time saying those. Omega-6 fatty acids are easy to get in vegetable oils and meat, especially in things like processed and fast foods. So usually Americans are getting tons of omega-6 fatty acids. Omega-3 fatty acids are a little less common in most people's diets. They are abundant in things like flaxseed and fish oils. They're also present in some nuts and seeds, and it's actually the proportion of the two that's important. So if you're getting a lot of omega-6 fatty acids, you actually need to eat more omega-3 fatty acids to keep the ratio of the two in balance. If you eat fewer omega-6 fatty acids, then if you don't have as many omega-3 fatty acids, that's okay. And if you're curious, the 3 and the 6 actually refer to locations of these double bonds in the fatty acids. The ratio of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids should be between 1:1 and 4:1, but most Americans consume a ratio between 10:1 and 25:1. So they are getting up to 25 more times more omega-6 fatty acids than omega-3 fatty acids. And so they're really not reaping the benefits of these omega-3 fatty acids. And that high ratio is associated with an increased risk of cardiovascular disease, cancer, inflammatory and autoimmune diseases, while a lower ratio is associated with a lower risk of breast cancer in women. So the body uses lipids for energy storage. It's a very efficient molecule for storage. It stores a lot of energy or a lot of calories in a relatively small light space. And we have virtually unlimited capacity. So most or a majority of our energy needs during rest is coming from this stored fat. We also use fat to help us absorb some vitamins like vitamin A. And you can see some of the other uses here in our bodies. Now, if we get too much oil and fat in our bodies, that can contribute to weight gain relatively rapidly because they are so calorie dense. And the type of lipids that we consume is really important, like I mentioned on that last slide. Saturated fats and trans fats also increase harmful cholesterol levels in the blood. So the type of fat really does matter. Now, if you're not getting enough fat in your diet, that's not a common problem, but deficiencies in omega-3 fatty acids may be associated with depression. And you actually, your brain, your nerves, and red blood cells need glucose for energy. So you can't get all of your energy from fat. After prolonged glucose deprivation, the brain and nerve cells develop the ability to derive about 2/3 of their minimum energy needs from ketone bodies that the body makes from fat fragments, like I was talking about on the carbohydrate slide. Now, another issue related to fat is cholesterol. Cholesterol is a waxy fat-like substance that the liver makes and is actually found in all cells. It helps the cell membranes gain stability. We need cholesterol to make some hormones. Steroid hormones need cholesterol. We also need it for vitamin D and bile acids. But too much cholesterol can build up and contribute to heart disease. And you've probably heard of that before. And there is a link between diet, cholesterol, and cardiovascular health. But it is super, super complex. So there are two types of cholesterol, HDL and LDL. So HDL is often kind of nicknamed healthy cholesterol. LDL is often nicknamed lethal or the unhealthy cholesterol. So LDL actually can carry this waxy substance to, which it carries cholesterol to cells, but what can happen is it can contribute to this waxy plaque building up in blood vessels, and that can block arteries, causing things like strokes and heart attacks. The HDL actually removes excess cholesterol. And so it can help prevent these plaques. Foods that are high in saturated fats are known to raise LDL, and foods high in unsaturated fats are known to actually raise HDL. And that's why the type of fat actually does matter. Now, trans fats are sort of a double whammy. Trans fats raise LDL while also lowering HDL. Now, proteins are made up of amino acids. And if you've had biology, this is probably very familiar to you. So there's a part of the amino acid that contains nitrogen over here. And so that amino part it just really just means nitrogen containing. And this variable R group just, it's different for every single different amino acid. And there are 20 different amino acids. So this R group is going to have a different ratio of things like carbons and oxygens and hydrogens, sometimes other elements like sulfur. So 9 of the 20 amino acids are essential, meaning our bodies can't produce them. We have to get them from our food. A food is considered having complete protein if it contains all 9 of these essential amino acids, but it's not at all necessary to consume all of those essential amino acids in a single meal. So you don't have to have complete proteins. The body uses protein. It actually uses amino acids. So interestingly, we digest proteins into amino acids before absorption. So, having that complete protein all in one place doesn't really matter because you're getting amino acids from a lot of different sources. We use those amino acids to build new molecules like DNA, hormones, neurotransmitters, and most often, new proteins. We can also use protein for energy, but usually when we're doing that, we're taking apart structural components of tissues. And we also have to remove that nitrogen that's in the amino acid, and that produces ammonia in our body, which eventually has to get converted into urea in our liver and then excreted in our urine. We can also convert protein into fat for storage. Now, too much protein has been linked to an increased risk of heart disease, cancer, osteoporosis, obesity, and kidney stones. But this is still under investigation, and the type of amino acids might matter. Too little protein is also associated with a type of malnutrition, protein energy malnutrition. It's very, very uncommon in the US. We tend to eat a lot of protein in the US. And the quality of protein matters. So some amino acids are easier to digest than others.